This is the story of Matt Emch and the encounter that he and 3 of his school friends had in the old steel mill at Brier Hill in Youngstown, Ohio. An encounter which haunted and traumatised all of them for life, and which, Matt believes, inadvertently led to the early passing of 2 of them. Now in his 50s, Matt had felt unable to speak about this until he finally did in 2021, nearly 35 years after it happened. So what did happen at the old steel mill? This is the Wolfman of Brier Hill. It was early June in the summer of 1987. 14-year-old Matt had just been released from school, and he and 3 of his friends, Sean, Mike and Ryan, did what most young lads that age do. They headed straight for the most dangerous place they knew of to hang out. In this case, it was the old abandoned steelworks at Brier Hill. A huge and sprawling metal and concrete shell, which had once served as a busy steelworks dating back to the 1900s, but which now stood empty and crumbling. Youngstown had once been a thriving centre of steel production, but by the 1980s it was a shadow of its former self. Now known as Murder Town, USA, it had one of the highest murder rates per capita of any city in the US at the time. The steel mill itself was believed to be a place where gangs carried out killings or dumped bodies, and where people who were living rough were known to hang out. It was also an area patrolled by feral dogs which normally went around in packs of 10 and which were known to attack anything they encountered, including humans. It was believed at the time that they had even killed 2 people who were sleeping rough in the old complex. At any rate, the youngsters were all armed with handguns for protection, which they had borrowed from home without their parents' knowledge. This may sound outrageous today, but it wasn't unheard of back in the 1980s. Even the building itself was hazardous. Large chunks of concrete would sometimes fall from the ceilings above. So overall, it was a very dangerous place in a very dangerous town. Matt and his friends had been banned from going anywhere near the mill. But of course they weren't deterred. They had found a safe spot which had become their secret hideout, and this was the old blast furnace building that stood just beside the rail track. On that particular evening, the youth stopped by at another friend's house, Clint, as he lived close to the steel mill. But he was away with family that evening, so they left their bikes there before making their way toward the steelworks. To get into the old mill, they had to go through a gap in the outer fence and then climb over a large gravel hill, all laughing at each other as they tried to scramble to the top, only to slide back down to the bottom again. Once inside the steelworks, it would take them another half hour of walking before they finally reached the furnace building. The furnace building itself was a large construction, reaching 4 floors to the top. And between the first and second floors, there were 4 steps missing, which made it impossible for the wild dogs to climb over, and also would have deterred most adults from even attempting. But Matt and his friends were easily able to hop over the stumps of concrete and rebar to the upper floor if they needed to. It was the perfect safe spot for them. Beyond the rail track lay large piles of coke, which is coal residue used in the steelmaking process. These piles would reach up to 25 feet high and stretched out as far as the eye could see in each direction along the track. From the first floor, you could stand in the centre of the room and see all the way up to the roof, as each floor above had a square cut out of the centre, so they would always build a bonfire in the centre of the first floor from pallets and other discarded materials that they'd scavenged from around the building. Now, needless to say, they would have been in a lot of trouble if they'd been seen there, and the huge windows all around made it easy to see inside. So they had made makeshift walls out of curved heavy metal slabs that they had found to obscure the view. There were hundreds of them scattered around the building. At any rate, safe and sound in their hiding place, they built a huge fire that particular night, about 15 feet high. One of them had found a bucket of some sort of oil or grease, and they all whooped in delight as he dumped it onto the pyre, sending a huge ball of flame right up to the 4th floor. As dusk fell, they settled in around their bonfire and sat in silence, watching the flames as they listened to the crickets and the calls of the wild outside, the river in the distance, and the gentle breeze as it sailed through the corridors of the old furnace building. Then, at some stage not long after night had fallen, sometime around 9:30, everything began to go suddenly quiet outside. No wildlife, no river, no breeze. All they could hear was the rumble and crackle of the fire in front of them. Emch described it afterwards as a feeling almost as if time had stood still. Suddenly, off in the distance they could hear the sound of dogs approaching, and they were making a lot of noise. There was clearly some sort of a commotion. Curious, the friends got up and walked over to the ledge overlooking the rail track, and as they watched, they saw a pack of dogs, about 6 or 7 of them, racing past. Normally, the pack would stop and bark at the youngsters, but this time they paid no attention to them whatsoever. They were completely focused on something in the direction of the coke pile as they veered left and raced across the track towards it, then over the top and out of view. The youngsters could hear the sound of rabid gnashing and barking. It was clear the dogs were attacking something, but they couldn't see what it was. But then, amongst all the sounds, they could also hear a loud and deep growl and a roar that none of them could recognize. Seconds later, there was the sound of dogs yelping, and they watched as one of them was flung in a tailspin over the coke heap, landing hard on the ground below. Moments later, another dog, this time badly wounded, was also thrown over. From the light of the fire, they could see a large gaping wound along the length of its side, and it was wailing in pain. As it limped away, Matt and his friends watched in amazement as the entire pack began to retreat back to where they had come from, something they had never seen before. Whatever it was, it had just made short work of a pack of wild dogs, and these were formidable canines, as he remembered 2 of them seemed to be pit bull mixes, and one of them a Rottweiler. As they watched the pack disappear into the distance, Sean whispered, "Guys, what is that? What's that over there?" The rest of them turned to the right to see a large, black, hulking figure emerge out of the darkness over the peak of the hill. It looked like a wolf. But this wolf was so large it didn't look real. As Matt recalls, it was easily bigger than an adult polar bear. He described its appearance as lithe and very muscular, covered in short, thick, jet black hair. It had long, pointed ears like the cropped ears of a Doberman, and long, sharp canine teeth top and bottom that protruded out of its closed mouth. Its eyes, he said, had a bright orange-yellow glow about them. The youngsters stood transfixed as this huge creature, whatever it was, watched the retreating dogs, and once the pack was gone, it actually lifted its leg and began to urinate on the coke pile with so much force that it sent grit and debris flying like a hose. This may sound comical now, but at the time it only added to the surreality of the scene in front of them. Up until then, the creature hadn't noticed any of them, but in the silence, Ryan backed up against their makeshift wall of shields, sending an echo of grating metal and concrete throughout the building. With that, the creature's eyes darted toward the sound and locked on all four youths, and they realized they'd been seen. At first it looked surprised, its eyes even widened, but then it seemed to become angry. As it stared at each of them in turn, Matt described its eyes as being so bright that it wasn't just eye shine from the fire. There seemed to be a literal glow there. He could even see the blackness of its pupils set against the glow, and when the creature looked at him, he felt as if it was looking straight through him. And then, the real nightmare began. As it stared all of them down, this huge creature raised itself straight up and stood like a human. This was no wolf. Whatever it was no wolf. Its body was shaped almost like a human's, with a muscular, athletic build. Its arms were so long, they went down past its knees almost to its ankles. It had hands instead of paws, which he described as resembling those of a raccoon's, and they were huge. Its hind legs were very dog-like. The animal looked as if it was anywhere between 10 and 12 feet tall. As the youngsters were trying to grasp what they were looking at, the creature let out something that sounded like a cross between a growl and a roar. Emch described how the sound resonated. He could even feel it vibrate in his chest, and it had an immediate effect on all four of them, making them feel sick, weak, and disorientated. He himself felt as if he was going to fall to his knees. Then, the creature, whatever it was, took a huge step forward down the hill, and they immediately turned and ran for the third floor. All of them had difficulty running. Emch said he felt heavy and off balance. Two of his friends were doubled over and dry retching and also having trouble moving. He has speculated since that the creature must have thrown some sort of infrasound, like a tiger does, which is believed to have some sort of paralyzing effect on its prey. They did manage to reach the third floor, but they knew there was no way out. There was a fire escape, but the ladder from there to the ground had long since disintegrated. Jumping wasn't an option. It would have killed or severely injured them. The only way was up, and that led to the roof. If that thing came in after them, they knew they were trapped. And that's when Ryan lost his nerve and started yelling. The rest of them tried to quieten him down, but he was having a full-on panic attack. Matt grabbed him, covering his mouth, and practically lifted him off his feet, almost suffocating him. When he eventually did quieten down, Matt slowly let go of him as he drew in a deep breath. And that's when they heard it. A loud and resounding thump from downstairs, followed by the sound of claws on concrete. And they knew it was in the building with them. In terrified silence, they listened to its creeping footfalls as it began to prowl the floor downstairs. Then their blood ran cold as they saw its huge, dark, hulking shadow slowly cover the far wall downstairs as it crept on all fours into the room, sniffing the air around it. Matt described how its eyes seemed to cast a faint amber glow on everything it looked at, almost as a torch would. As it stalked the room, they could see the huge muscles on its back ripple and flex, and its scapula, its shoulder muscles, raised left and right like a big cat as it moved. Apart from its jet black coat, it seemed to have one long streak of white that ran all the way down its back, and it had a long tail which resembled that of a panther's. Saliva was pouring from its mouth, and they could even hear it landing in drops on the ground around it. Its ears cupped from side to side in the way a dog's does when it's focused on listening for any sign of movement around it. As it approached the fire, it didn't seem to be bothered by the intense heat, but as it was passing the flames, Matt noticed something else strange. Its left hand or paw seemed to momentarily cloak in front of the flames. It became transparent. He could see right through it. He noticed that the flames nearest the hand seemed to reach out towards it almost magnetically, and they looked like the footage you would see of solar flares on the surface of the sun. This lasted for about 3 seconds before its hand became visible again. As the creature was sniffing the air, a breeze must have carried their scent to it. Its head snapped upwards, and its eyes locked onto them for a second time. The beast then rose up on 2 legs again, stretched its arms out behind it, and bellowed at them once more. But this time it didn't seem to have the same physical effect. They didn't feel nauseous or weak. Matt believes the effect may have been blocked this time by the concrete walls and steps that stood between them. The creature then turned and looked left, then back up at the youths. There seemed to be an intelligence there, not something that was just canine. Then it turned right and looked over towards the stairs. It looked back up at them again, growling and baring its teeth. Matt swears to this day that it looked as if it was grinning at them, and he got a sinking feeling in his stomach because he knew what was going to happen next. The animal dropped back on all fours and began darting towards the stairs with a speed that was frightening. It moved with the grace and speed of a panther as it ascended the stairways, but going from 4 legs to 2 and back with very little effort. It seemed to use its tail as a counterbalance, a type of rudder as it was turning corners. Mike and Ryan immediately ran, one of them to the fire escape and the other to the upper floor. But Matt and Sean stayed put near the top of the stairs, frozen. As Matt turned to Sean, he could see tears running down his friend's face, and he was looking back at him as if asking for some solution or way out, but he had none. The beast was barely 50 feet away. It launched over the missing steps as if the drop wasn't even there. And that's when Matt began to think of his life, his home and his family, even his pet dog, and the future he'd never get to live. He wondered which one of them would be taken first as it ran across the floor to the next flight of steps. 20 feet. As it reached the steps of the 3rd floor, they began to count down their fate. 10 feet. By this stage, it was already halfway up the steps. What happened next, Matt describes, could only have been divine intervention. A passing train blasted its horn so loudly that the animal stopped dead in its tracks. There was a long pause, and the train blasted once again, and kept blasting as it sped by, carriage by carriage, past the furnace building. The creature stood still, staring in the direction of the passing freight. Then it looked back at Matt and his friend, then back at the train. It hesitated. He said it looked angry and frustrated, as if it wanted to tear them both apart, but almost as if something beyond its control was preventing it from going any further. There was nothing to physically stop the beast from attacking the two youths, but it looked as if it seemed to be mulling over what to do. Glaring at them one last time, the creature suddenly turned and retreated back down the stairs as quickly as it had ascended. Matt could hear his friends above shouting out the windows at the passing train. He stared at the beast as it sped down from floor to floor, but was shocked to see that by the time it reached the first floor, it was actually beginning to lose its canine form and seemed to be changing into a black, smoky mass as it darted across the floor towards the exit. It wasn't a blur caused by speed either. It completely changed from a solid, physical form into a black, shadowy mass. Then, it was gone. To this day, Matt doesn't know why the train had sounded its horn at that exact moment as it was passing. In all the times he had been at the steel mill, this had never happened before. Mike and Ryan descended the stairs looking relieved that the creature was gone and that help seemed to be coming. Whether the driver had seen the creature or had just seen the fire and was trying to disperse everyone inside, they didn't know. But either way, as it turned out, the train didn't stop. It continued on into the distance, and they realized they were on their own again. That's when Ryan began to panic again. Trying to calm him down, they stayed on the third floor for an hour, debating on what to do. Matt believed they should get out of there, but Ryan refused, saying it would be out there waiting for them. He wanted to stay inside the building and wait it out overnight. By this stage, he was in almost total meltdown and wouldn't budge. Eventually, Matt lost his patience with them and said, "Look, if we don't get out of here, that thing will be back. You can stay if you want, or you can come with us, but we're getting out of here." Ryan begged not to be left behind, so Matt told Sean to hold on to the back of Ryan's shirt while Matt held on to the front and they would guide him out. They slowly made their way to the second floor, where they stayed for another 20 minutes, gathering the courage to move from there to the first floor, and finally, out of the building. From there, they began the long march out. But this time, they had their guns drawn and at the ready. Asked many years later why they didn't try to shoot the creature, he said they were so terrified that it never even occurred to them. But he also said he's convinced that bullets wouldn't have made any difference anyway, other than to make the creature even angrier than it already was. The march back out of the steel mill in almost total darkness was slow and terrifying. Their torches gave them some light, but not much. And they jumped at every sound they heard on the way. Every rustle of leaves, every sound of an animal, every gust of wind. always looking back to see if they were being pursued. When they finally reached the outer perimeter of the steelworks, there was just one obstacle that stood in their way, and that was the giant gravel hill that they had to climb over to get back to the outer fence. But this time, the gravel hill filled them with dread as they knew how difficult it was going to be to climb. And it was their only way to get to the opening on the outer fence. Exhausted as they were from fear and adrenaline, they managed eventually to crawl and scramble to the top, but had to help each other over the final push. And just as they made it over the top, they could hear the dogs way off in the distance again, and they thought that it was back. Scrambling through the fence, they trudged, exhausted, to Clint's house. But again, no one was in. Matt remembers going straight for the hose outside the house, drenching himself in water and drinking as much of it as he could before handing it around to the rest of them. They all sat there on the porch for another hour, in total silence, staring into space while they tried to make sense of what had just happened. When they finally did break the silence, they all agreed to tell their parents what had happened. Then they got up and made their way to Sean's house, where they found his parents waiting for them, worried that they hadn't shown up. When they told Sean's parents where they had been, Sean's father yelled at them, "You went where? Are you kidding me? You could have been killed down there. The place is falling apart. There have been bodies found down there." When the youths tried to explain what had happened to them, Sean's mother waved them off with a shake of the head, saying, "I'm going to bed. You deal with this." Sean's father was in charge of the city, as Matt put it, and was involved in every aspect of the running of Youngstown, including its law enforcement. He was well aware of how dangerous the old steel mill was, and was so enraged that he warned them if they ever went down there again, he'd see to it that they all went to juvenile hall. He then called Matt's father over, who was there within minutes as they lived close by, and he sat both of them down. Turning to Matt's father, he said, "Now you know the situation here. If these boys go around talking about this, number one, all their classmates are going to go down there and one of them is going to get killed. Secondly, your son is going to be the joke of the school. He won't be able to play ball. The coach is going to think he's crazy. They'll all think he's been taking drugs." He then glanced at Matt sternly for a long moment, before continuing. "You have to promise me that you'll make your son not talk about this. He doesn't tell his siblings about this, and you don't talk to your wife about it." The two men then went into the kitchen and spoke privately for a few minutes, before Matt and his father left for home. On the way back, his father told him never to repeat this to anyone, and that if he tells his brother and sister, it'll only give them nightmares, and they won't be able to sleep. And so Matt agreed not to tell them. Most of the parents had balked at the story as a lie that the youngsters had told to get themselves out of trouble. But Matt's father could see that something had terrified him, and even asked him if it had maybe been a bear with mange or something like that. But the youth insisted it was no bear. Then, a week later, Sean had told him that after he had pestered his father about not believing him, his father finally admitted that he already knew about the creature. That law enforcement had received calls about them, and yes, he did say them, and that 2 patrolling officers had even seen one. He also implied that at least one of the 2 people that had been killed down there had been killed by it and not by dogs. Needless to say, Matt and his friends as youths never went down there again and never spoke to anyone else about it. They rarely even mentioned it to each other afterwards. Ryan, who had had the panic attack that night, didn't speak for 2 weeks afterwards, and eventually his parents sent him to therapy. They didn't believe his story when he told them, and they thought he must have been suffering from some sort of drug-induced hallucination. The accusation that they must have been taking drugs was deeply hurtful and aggravating to the youngsters. Matt himself sought out a priest to talk to about what happened, and being a Catholic, he visited the local Maronite Christian church, where he expected not to be believed. But instead, the priest told him, "There are things that happen in this world that most people don't know and never experience. Sometimes things bleed into our universe, and we see them. They see us. And sometimes things happen not so good, and sometimes nothing happens." The priest went on to say that he knew personally that these things existed, and that he also believed God had protected Matt and his friends that night. Many years later, as adults, the 4 of them did visit the site again, maybe for some type of closure or to make some sort of sense of it. And this time, they made sure they went down there heavily armed. Thankfully, nothing happened. As mentioned, Matt only went public in 2021. But it was his long and detailed interview with Josh Ninocchio in 2023 that brought a tidal wave of interest to his story. It's clear to see in his interviews that he has been traumatised by what happened that night. Over the years, he had been on antidepressants and other medication. And then there were the nightmares. Of the 4 youths who witnessed this, only 2 are now still alive. Sean and Mike have both since passed. Matt said that things just happened in their own lives, that it caused their lives to spiral, and that ultimately led to their deaths. He didn't elaborate further on this, but he did say that he believed their fates were indirectly linked to what happened that night. Matt is the only person who has gone public about the encounter. Ryan is still alive and quite successful in the construction business, but to this day he suffers from what he saw that night and is still in therapy. He can't speak about it, even privately, for more than a few minutes, and will not talk about it in public. Maybe one day, he says. Matt's long and detailed interview with Josh Ninocchio from What Lurks Beneath is well worth watching for those who haven't seen it. During the interview, Josh mentioned that his mother had once told him of a woman in the East Coast who had an encounter with a similar creature after her car had broken down near the woods. Minutes after her car died, the creature appeared out of the tree line and began to slowly approach her. As it came closer, she claimed she could hear it in her mind saying, "I'm going to rip your throat out." She began to pray, and as soon as it reached her car, it suddenly stopped, and she maintained that she could hear it again in her mind, saying something like, "I didn't know you were protected." She doesn't remember the exact words, but it strongly implies that her prayers had acted as a barrier. The creature turned away and retreated back into the woods. This account, plus the description of Matt's account, suggests that the creature could possibly be demonic in nature and may be able to move from its own world over to ours and back. The story does suggest that they have to follow certain rules and apparently are not able to touch those who are spiritually protected. I have heard a number of dogman stories, as the subject does interest me. Many of them, I have to admit, I haven't believed. But I do believe Matt Emch is honest and sincere in his telling of what happened that night. About the nightmares, he described a disturbing and realistic dream he had had. In the dream, he was in his back garden when he was suddenly knocked to the ground from behind, and something started crawling on top of him. When he turned around, he was face to face with the creature that he saw that night in 1987. In the dream, he heard the creature in his mind telling him that it had come for him all those years ago, that he had been talking too much about it, and that it would see him again. He woke up in a cold sweat, with his pet dog whimpering beside him. Since he went public, he has been contacted by several security guards who used to patrol the area, saying that they too had witnessed strange things around the steel mill and the woods and river. Strange lights in the tree line, which may have been eyes, and something just out of view stalking them from behind the trees. This, and a constant feeling of menace, of being watched or followed. It would be interesting if the driver of the train that night was to ever come forward and tell us what he saw, if anything. The steel mill itself was demolished in 1997, 10 years after the encounter there. Why they stalk this place is anyone's guess, but it's believed that there are old Indian burial grounds in that area, and dogmen have been believed to frequent native burial grounds. Then there is the nearby river, and they are also believed to stay close to water. What exactly they are is hard to know. The one that Matt Emch described was very physical and solid, even down to the fact that it marked its territory the same way a dog, cat or lion would. So it had a fully physical metabolic system. But then its paw cloaked in front of the fire while its eyes behaved like torches. And then it morphed into a shadow and dispersed into thin air like a wisp of smoke in a breeze. There have been accounts of people who have shot at these things, only for the bullets to have no effect, or to have seemingly gone through it as if it wasn't there and lodged in the wall behind it instead. The creature's ability to be both physical and nebulous at will is hard to fathom, and certainly goes beyond our understanding, whatever it is. Good night. wherever you are.